I used to believe there was no force powerful enough to sever the bond between a mother and her child. I carried that belief like armor through every hardship, every night I worked late, every missed meal, every tear I cried alone in the dark when my husband passed away. My daughter Maya was the reason I kept going. She was my light, my pride, the very center of my world. When she married Evan 4 years ago, I tried my best to accept him. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious way, but he carried a certain sharpness under his skin, little remarks wrapped in jokes, comments about money that felt more like warnings than concerns. Still, I told myself he made my daughter happy, and that was all any mother truly wanted. After I lost my job and my health began to falter, Mia insisted I move in with them, just for a little while. She said it with love in her eyes, and I believed her. I trusted her. For months after moving in, I tried to be as small and unobtrusive as possible. I cooked, cleaned, stayed in my room most days, and used my savings to contribute to groceries even when they insisted it was unnecessary. Looking back, maybe they said, "Oh, necessary," but they didn't say, "Unwelcome." One evening in February, the air heavy with cold and the smell of roasted chicken drifting through the apartment, I sensed something was off. Maya and Evan were unusually quiet during dinner. They exchanged glances, silent conversations passing between them that I wasn't invited into. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Finally, Evan set down his fork with a little too much force. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. "We need to talk," he said. His tone alone made my heart start to race. Mia reached for her napkin, folding and unfolding the corners like she was bracing herself. "About what?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. "About your stay here," Evan replied. "It's too much. Too much." I repeated. I blinked at him. "I barely use anything. I stay out of your way." "That's not the point," he said with a practiced sigh, like he'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. "We're trying to start a family. We have bills, responsibilities. We can't afford extra mouths to feed." Extra mouths. Plural. As if I was some stray animal he stumbled across and felt obligated to tolerate. I looked at Maya, waiting, begging, for her to defend me. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. My sweet, gentle girl who used to cling to me when thunderstorms frightened her, now stared into her lap as if I was a problem she had created and needed to solve. "Maya," I whispered, "do you feel the same?" Her voice cracked. "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place. Just for now. Until things settle." So many words swirled in my head. Memories, protests, heartbreak. But none of them made it out of my mouth. Instead, I felt myself shrink, the way a person does when they finally accept that love does not always protect you. That night, while they watched TV in the next room, I packed my belongings quietly. Everything I owned fit into one small suitcase. When Mia saw me standing by the door, her face twisted with something that resembled guilt, but she didn't stop me. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She didn't, and as the cold night wrapped around me, while I walked away from the home I thought I belonged in, I realized something painful. My daughter had chosen him over me. Fully, clearly, and without hesitation. The first night after leaving Maya's apartment, I sat alone in a tiny room that smelled faintly of damp wood and old cigarettes. It wasn't home, just 4 walls and a narrow bed whose springs groaned like they resented my weight. I placed my single suitcase at the foot of the bed and stared at it, realizing for the first time how small my life had become. A lifetime of sacrifice packed into a rectangle of fabric. I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for Mia to call, for her to say she was sorry, for her to say she'd made a mistake. But the phone stayed silent. The next morning, I walked to a nearby cafe and bought the cheapest coffee they had. I sat by the window, watching couples laugh and families eat breakfast together, like the world hadn't cracked open beneath my feet. I tried to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat, but it wasn't the coffee, it was grief. In the weeks that followed, I tried to rebuild some semblance of routine. I found part-time work cleaning offices in the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me occupied and helped me stretch my savings. At night, when the fluorescent lights hummed above me and the building corridors echoed with emptiness, I found strange comfort in the rhythm of sweeping floors. It gave me something to control, however small. But no amount of sweeping could clear the ache from my heart. Every day, for the first month, I checked my phone. Sometimes I'd turn the ringer on loud, just in case Mia called while I was working. Other times I would mute it, as if trying to protect myself from a disappointment I already knew was coming. She never called. Perhaps the worst part wasn't the silence itself. It was the realization that she had adapted to life without me faster than I had ever thought possible. I had always imagined that, even as an adult, she would need me in some way. Not financially, emotionally, but her absence proved something painful she didn't. And if she didn't need me, had she ever wanted me? Or was I simply a convenience until I became inconvenient? One night, after a long shift, I lay on the stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling until tears blurred the cracks above me. I remembered the night she graduated high school, how she hugged me so tightly my ribs hurt. She'd whispered, "I'll always take care of you, Mom, always." I had believed her without hesitation. Now I wondered if she even remembered making that promise. But pain has a way of reshaping itself. Somewhere between loneliness and heartbreak, something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. I told myself I wouldn't wait by the phone anymore. I would survive, and I would do it without leaning on anyone, especially not the daughter who tossed me away at the first sign of inconvenience. It was during one of my morning coffee rituals that everything changed. I picked up a classified newspaper someone had left on the table. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to distract myself. But then my eyes landed on a listing printed in bold letters: apartment building for sale, quick sale preferred. I glanced at the address and felt my heart jolt. It was their building, the same place Maya and Evan lived, the same place I had been exiled from. At first, I let out a small, humorless laugh. Life played strange games, but after the shock faded, a strange, quiet certainty began forming inside me, a feeling so unexpected it made my hands tremble slightly. Maybe this wasn't a coincidence. Maybe this was fate handing me an opportunity, not to hurt them, but to reclaim something I had lost the moment they pushed me out: control, independence, dignity, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to close the wound their betrayal had carved into me. I folded the newspaper carefully and slipped it into my bag. For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. I felt purpose. The newspaper listing stayed folded in my bag for 2 days before I gathered the courage to look at it again. Every time I touched the brittle paper, a storm of emotions stirred in me: fear, hope, disbelief, and something sharper, something that tasted like strength. I had spent my whole life letting circumstances push me around. But this time, I wasn't going to be the woman who waited quietly for scraps of kindness. I made the call. The seller, a tired-sounding man named Mr. Hawkins, explained that he was retiring and eager to close quickly. The building had been in his family for decades, but none of his children wanted the responsibility of being landlords. I listened, heart pounding, as he talked about the property, its age, its tenants, its issues, its potential. "You said you were eager to sell," I finally said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "That's right," he replied. "If you're serious, we can meet tomorrow." I thanked him, hung up, and pressed the phone to my chest. Serious? Was I serious? Could I really take on something like this? I lived in a tiny rented room with one suitcase to my name. I scrubbed office floors at night. And yet, beneath all the reasons to doubt myself, a quiet confidence whispered, "You can do this. You've survived worse." So I put on my nicest blouse, wrinkled but clean, and met Mr. Hawkins at the property the next morning. Standing in front of the building was surreal. I had walked through those very doors with grocery bags in hand not long ago, trying to be invisible to avoid upsetting Evan. Now I walked through them as a potential buyer. We toured the hallways, the storage rooms, the basement. The building was old but sturdy, with good bones. It needed love, and I understood that feeling more than anyone. When we finished, Mr. Hawkins led me to his car to discuss numbers. "I'll be honest," he said, rubbing his chin. "I expected a real estate investor. Not well. Someone like you." "I know," I said calmly. "But I've worked my whole life. I saved everything I could. I can afford this." What I didn't tell him was how many nights I'd skipped meals so Mia could eat. How many promotions I'd turned down because they conflicted with school schedules or doctor appointments. How carefully, painfully, I'd built the savings that now sat quietly in my bank account. By the end of the week, the papers were signed. I was the owner of the building. The day the keys touched my palm, I closed my fingers around them like they were a lifeline, a reminder that even after heartbreak, life can hand you something unexpected. I walked down the hallways alone, listening to the familiar creak of the floorboards, the hum of the old heater, the distant voices of tenants behind closed doors. These were my hallways now. My responsibility. My investment. My turning point. The first thing I did was review all the rent prices. They were shockingly low, far below the neighborhood average. I understood immediately why the building had drained Mr. Hawkins. The tenants weren't paying nearly enough to cover maintenance, let alone upgrades. Raising the rent wasn't personal. Not at first, it was business. But when I reached the line item for apartment 3B, Mia and Evan's unit, my breath caught. Seeing their names in my ledger felt surreal, like the universe had returned a card I had never expected to hold again. I made my decision with a steady hand. All tenants would receive a reasonable increase, except one. For Mia and Evan, I raised the rent to market value, plus a little extra for the months they'd dismissed me as a burden. By the time all the letters were prepared, my hands trembled, not with guilt, but with the electric hum of reclaiming my power. 3 months before, I had walked out of this building with a suitcase and a broken heart. Now, I walked through it as its landlady, and for the first time in a long time I felt strong. Not vindictive, not cruel, just strong. The rent notices went out early on a Tuesday morning. I watched from the window of the small office at the back of the building as the tenants checked their mailboxes, some frowning, some shrugging, a few looking relieved the increase wasn't too steep. I had instructed my property manager to handle general complaints, but I knew there was one confrontation I needed to witness myself. By late afternoon, I heard hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway, the kind of frantic, clipped steps people take when desperation starts closing in. Then came the knock, a sharp, anxious pounding. I stepped behind the partition wall where I could listen unseen. It has to be a mistake, Maya's voice trembled. It has to be. My property manager, Denise. There's no mistake. The new owner adjusted the rent to market value. But this is 3 times what we pay. Evan snapped, outraged. Who raises rent like that? It's extortion. It's the new policy, Denise replied calmly. All concerns must be discussed directly with the owner. There was a pause. I could practically feel Maya's panic humming through the wall. Fine. Evan said tightly. Then get them. We're not leaving until we talk to them. I took a slow breath and stepped out. Maya's face went pale. Mom. The word dropped from her lips like a stone sinking into water, shocking the surface, rippling outward with guilt and disbelief. Evan stood stiff beside her, his frustration dissolving into stunned silence. You, he whispered. You bought the building? Yes, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt 3 months ago. The room filled with a thick, heavy quiet. Mia's eyes began to shine. Why didn't you tell me? I studied her face. The confusion, the shame, the regret that had arrived too late. You didn't call, I said softly, not once. Oh, her lips trembled. I wanted to. I just didn't know what to say. You didn't want to deal with the consequences of your choice. I corrected gently. You asked me to leave your home because I was an extra mouth to feed, so I found a home of my own. Evan stepped forward, anger returning now that the shock had passed. Tripling our rent? That's revenge, not business, I said plainly. Some of it is. He opened his mouth, but Mia grabbed his arm, shaking her head. For the first time, she truly looked at me, not through the lens of convenience or obligation, but as a woman with limits, boundaries, and scars. Mom, please, she whispered. We can't pay this. We don't have that kind of money. Just give us the old rate, just for a little while, please. Her tears came freely now, falling in urgent streams. And for a moment, just a moment, the mother in me nearly rushed forward to gather her in my arms, the way I used to when she woke from nightmares. But then I remembered the night I packed my suitcase while she stood silently in the doorway, letting me walk out into the cold. I remembered the loneliness, the hunger, the silence she gifted me for 3 whole months. No, I said gently. Her face crumpled. Mom, we'll have to move. I nodded. I know. You're really going to let us be homeless? Evan growled. No, I replied. I'm going to let you be responsible. Responsibility, a concept he had never quite grasped. You taught me, I continued, turning to Mia, that when a place no longer has room for you, you pack your things and leave. You taught me that survival is possible even when your heart breaks. Mia sobbed quietly, covering her mouth with her hands. Evan looked away, jaw clenched. You have 30 days, I said. Just like you gave me. They moved out 23 days later. The unit sat empty for a week before a lovely older couple rented it. The first time I saw them carry their boxes inside, laughing and chatting. I felt something settle in my chest, something that felt like closure. Mia calls now. Not often. Sometimes she apologizes. Sometimes she asks how I'm doing. Sometimes she just cries. I listen, but I no longer bend. I no longer shrink myself to fit into her comfort. I have learned something precious and painful. Love does not mean letting people break you without consequence. I am not a burden. I am not an extra mouth to feed. I am a woman who survived betrayal and found her strength on the other side. And this time, I will never let anyone take it from me again.